Welcome to the Great Shrimp Show. Today we are going to go down a figurative rabbit hole. For anyone who keeps aquariums, especially for shrimp keepers, I think this video will be a necessity because there is a whole world out there that is untested, unexplored, and pretty darn scary if you know what you're looking at. Let's get things started so you can see firsthand what I am talking about. Enjoy. So like anyone who's browsed the internet, I've come across the luring advertisements for eBay, Amazon, and Petco. The internet knows who I am, and it knows that I have pets. Specifically, Google has sold the internet the information that I search a ton on their service, and 80% of what I search for is related to fish keeping and especially keeping shrimp. It's no surprise, therefore, that eventually Aliexpress started beckoning to me from the corners of the bottom of various web pages that I had landed on. They'd pop up as a group of 4 or more items, all related to what I had browsed or searched for. Needless to say, the internet is almost always watching. Eventually, I decided to dip my toe in and find stuff that might be useful for sprucing up my tanks. International suppliers and manufacturers have a plethora of stuff that is simply just not sold here in the US by the likes of Amazon and other retailers. This stuff doesn't find its way into our mom and pop stores either, so there is basically just 1 or 2 places to find it. I spent the better part of a few days browsing pages and pages of Aliexpress during their most recent anniversary sale. They have sales all the time, and like Amazon, it could be for one reason or another, or for celebrations, and they happen multiple times a year. I went through 50 plus pages of search results, and I frequently restarted my search over from scratch because Aliexpress's algorithm seems to have a very short attention span. It will offer up a lot more of what you're currently looking at and attempt to track you from product to product, but it gives more weight to what you're settled on at the moment. Because of this, it can be easy to become sidetracked and find yourself looking at pool noodles when you started shopping for high-density filter pads. I spent days browsing the cheapest filters, filter media, feeding dishes, foods, supplements, decorations, stands, lights, pumps, pads, breeding aids, connectors, pipes, clamps, and even found live animals at least once or twice. I was, of course, a bit skeptical of some of this stuff that I found because I couldn't verify independently what most of this was made out of. There is little or no chance I would get someone from customer service, as Aliexpress is a collection of sellers most often, and they can be on the service for only a couple of days or weeks at most. Some brands pop up and disappear monthly, so I couldn't be sure that what I was buying would be safe for my shrimp or even safe for me to handle. Now, you might think that I'm being a bit paranoid here, but I recently read articles and I've seen YouTubers who said that the Chinese websites like Banggood and Aliexpress were selling mildly radioactive materials with no warnings. They even found that items with supposedly homeopathic properties were in fact toxic, radioactive, or just plain junk. So, taking that into account, I was very, very selective of what I bought and ended up shipping to myself. I initially concentrated only on filter media because there were a couple of designs that I really appreciated that came close to mimicking or even surpassing some of the most well-reviewed and performing products available on Amazon. I wanted to find a highly porous media that was somewhat natural and wouldn't leave an unknown residue in the tank water. I also wanted a high surface area to volume ratio. And lastly, I wanted something that was inexpensive because, after all, why was I here in the first place? Of course, I wanted to find the best deal while not killing my shrimp. This is really interesting. There are little testimonials and marketing speak sentences all over these pages, and it is sometimes a good idea to read them. For instance, this seemingly natural stone says that it, quote, can release oxygen, has certain biological activity, and purifies water by absorbing bleaching powder and other toxic substances. It's not going to be really helpful, but if you do pay attention, sometimes you'll spot something that's a red flag, like releasing a bunch of unknown exotic minerals into your water. Who knows if it actually does that, but I take it at face value and just assume that it's releasing something. This one says that it can emit powerful far-infrared rays and helps sound water bodies. I don't know what that means, but I imagine that a lot of what's happening here is that there is poorly translated copy, or there aren't the correct words for what they're trying to put down in the English language. So I eventually settled on two types of biomedia, an activated carbon filtering component, and some filtering pads that were advertised all over the place. Here's what I found after receiving them, unpackaging, and testing everything that I bought. This is what happened for round one. The first media that I got is frequently advertised as the 5D media. It is a larger sintered ceramic bead formed into a sort of torus or sphere. The product description says that each object has upwards of 20,000 smaller spheres that make up its volume. There is little or no dust, and I rinsed it, and the stuff that came out into the water is a lot less than you'd get from washing traditional ceramic media or activated carbon. That's due in part to the sintering process, which fires the ceramics until they bond together, and you can see that there is a sort of glaze on the surface that gives off a nice sheen. It's roughly 1.2 inches or 30 millimeters across, and the inner diameter is 10 millimeters. It comes in packs of 500 grams, which gives about 20 of these spheroids. I first decided to do a water displacement test, but I really didn't feel like doing the math required to measure the volume of the shapes to extract the volume of water that they displaced. So I would end up doing it by eye. I started with 250 milliliters of water, and this spheroid displaced an additional about 10 milliliters of water by volume. It's not really scientific, but once I took it out of the water, after a few hours of sitting there, about a milliliter of water escaped onto the surface. So it holds water, but it may not actually be a ton. That doesn't really matter though. It just has to actually hold some water. The abundance of surface structure is what is way more important. The second media is a more common shape, size, and function. It is a small spherical shape that looks solid but boasts a high permeability to water on its product description page. It also has a hollow core, which is a great feature if the water can get into the interior. If water permeates the outer shell, the surface area of a product like this gets boosted so that it can go toe-to-toe with something as large as the 5D media that we just looked at. When you crack it in half, you can see the shell and the inner core. The substance on the surface extends all the way down to a core where a different material starts and then ends abruptly as the empty part of the core starts. It's hard to tell what the materials are. There is definitely a kind of rock or similar material, the red stuff, that makes up the bulk of its volume. And then there is a sort of shiny material that makes up the rest of it, that flows between the red mineral stuff. It's hard to tell, but I would say that this is a ceramic because it has some dust and a smell that reminds me of pottery. It also conforms to a sphere, whereas the rock portions are distributed over the surface in an even pattern, and they don't squish or melt like a sintered ceramic powder. Every piece of the media is a different size, but they average in between 12 and 10 millimeters in diameter, so it's a good size for putting into a media bag or into most canister filter trays. This small media is about half the size of the Brightwater S series media that I currently use in my canister filters. Unfortunately, Brightwater doesn't currently make this media anymore, so that is a bit of a bummer. Again, I opted for the budget backyard scientist approach and tossed some of the media into the 250 milliliters of water that I had prepared. This time it displaced only about 2 to 4 milliliters and started to bubble away as the air inside of the cavities was being replaced with water that was seeping into the interior of the spheres. This was really surprising, and it was a really big deal. It didn't look like this was very permeable, but it reveals that this media is actually highly permeable, and the bubbling would go on like this for a good 5 minutes. Overall, the water displaced went down by about 1 milliliter, so there was a good amount of water that had actually flowed into the spherical structure, lending credence to the overall claims of the product website. The last item I had delivered is the carbon filter cube tube thingy. It started popping up all over the place on Aliexpress a few months ago, and it's dirt cheap. I've seen it paired with a little plastic sheath that I've been seen used in a proper cube size, which is 100 millimeters squared. And then there is this half cube, which is 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters by 5 centimeters. This product does not mention what it is made of, but you can infer by the color and the weight that it is probably mostly carbon. And because it is brittle, you can assume that it is probably a compacted dust or very fine grains. I'm not really sure I'm going to add this to a tank with my shrimp in it because I have no idea how it was manufactured and the process that led to its production. It could all be just waste material, and if that's the case, there may be metals or other nasty stuff that come along for the ride with the carbon. As for how you're supposed to use it, you're essentially told to load it into your tank and let it do its thing. They have some warnings, like you're not supposed to place it with the tubes facing down because water won't be able to flow through it, but the product page shows it with a use example that have it facing exactly the wrong way, so I don't know how effective it really is. They also say that you can put it in the return area of a sump or a filter, but it really is only sized for a sump or being put directly into the tank. Once it is in the tank, though, in order to filter a large amount of water, or to use with a big fish that produces a lot of waste, you're going to need a lot more volume than this cube provides. It is good to have activated carbon with a high surface area in your tank so that you can remove impurities. Although the cost per weight for this cube is pretty good, personally I'd say you're much better off getting activated carbon from another source and skipping this sort of gimmick entirely. So what do we have, and is this stuff any good? Well, I can confirm that the 5D media is extremely good. It has a ton of surface area, it's a good neutral porous ceramic material and won't affect the pH of your water while simultaneously providing a great playground for nitrifying bacteria. It sucks up quite a bit of water and doesn't displace too much volume based on its size. It is an ideal structure for biomedia. Its size is a bit cumbersome though, making it only really useful for a large canister filter or a sump. There are some other sizes of media in this type, including one that is about a third as big, so I may try getting that. It also has a good price to weight ratio, so it's actually a better value than other biomedia of comparable performance. However, the small media is the real winner here. It's dirt cheap compared to comparable products. I ran tests and it does wick water away from the surface very quickly and is able to penetrate to the center hollow sphere. This should slow down the movement of water and bacteria and other harmful compounds, allowing the beneficial bacteria more time to do their magic. This is an essential part of any biomedia, and this is where the real contenders for top place find their stride. This media shares a lot in common with garden gravel that is intended for helping plants retain water, so it is a good choice to use in your aquarium filter to provide a good home for bacteria. Just about my only concern is what this media is actually made of. I can't put my finger on any one material. It could be a clay, silica, gravel, mica, glass, or even a ceramic, but there is just too much clouding its real components on Aliexpress's website. That's about it for today. I hope that you enjoyed what I had for you from the wilds of the internet. I know that there wasn't a single shrimp in this shrimp shoal video, but keeping your tank is just about as important as keeping your sanity, so I thought that this would prove useful to people who are just getting started, especially in shrimp keeping. Next week, we'll be getting back to the 2 tanks that I have, as well as seeing how my next tanks are going and my future ideas are progressing. Thank you again for showing up, and I hope that you have some sweet shrimpy dreams before we meet next. Good night.